AskReddit: by what way? What's something only the rich could afford in the past that is now affordable by most? Aluminum. It was an insanely expensive metal until the whole Herald process was developed in 1886. The Napoleonic emperors dined on aluminum while the lesser nobles settled for gold and silver. Spices. Like all of them. Thank you for reminding me not to take my spice drawer for granted. Sugar. Southern style sweet tea was an act of conspicuous consumption. Tea, sugar and ice all had to be imported, at great expense, to make it. Books. Books used to be hoarded in monasteries and colleges. Now they're all you can eat, and delivered on your phone. Even with a printing press, a single book would take hundreds, even thousands, of man-hours to make in years past. It's fairly recently that they've been available to the common folk. Televisions have dropped 99.31% in price since the 50s. I'd also like to point out smartphones. Apple wasn't the first smartphone. They were popular but thousands of dollars. My mom had one. It ran Windows. In 1983, I bought my first new TV. It was standard def and analog, of course, 13 inches quad. It had a fancy new feature in the form of CVBS sockets, $300 from Montgomery Ward. That same number of unadjusted dollars will get you an LCD flat screen many times that size, supporting digital TV, HD, maybe even UHD, and then you can further adjust for inflation. Purple clothing. In the past, purple dye was only available by smashing up hundreds of pounds worth of a specific species of snail, which were only available in certain parts of the world. The cost of a large purple robe would be somewhere between a high-end Lamborghini and a private jet, depending upon where you lived. This is why purple was the color of royalty. It was also often illegal for normies to wear purple. Imagine going back in time while accidentally wearing a purple hoodie and immediately getting carted off to prison for insulting the king. Computers and printers. I spent $1,000 on a laser printer 30 years ago. Used it for my consulting work. I think it printed 4 pages a minute. Fresh meat and fresh vegetables and fruit year round. And that's pretty recent. Later 70s child and I remember waiting till the summer for raspberries. Long distance phone calls. When I was young it was way cheaper to mail cassette tapes back and forth updating each other. For after Bell telephone was broken up, you could finally shop around. I remember when I finally got a long distance plan where I only paid 2 cents a minute, down from 10 cents. And I would call my grandma. She was always say, "Let me let you go, this call must be costing you a fortune." She would freak out that I could call her for basically free now. Pineapples. This should be higher. They used to rent them out. Just over 100 years ago cars were the luxury item of the rich while poor people rode horses. Now most people have a car and only rich people have horses. The relative cost of horses stayed the same. Diamonds. Lab-grown diamonds are crashing the prices. Only because the supply become controlled by a monopoly. Historically sapphire was a more valuable gemstone. Running water. It's funny how in some ways bottled water was once considered luxe and now reusable Stanley bottles are considered higher end. Swords. Anyone can go online and buy a cheap sword with a sharp edge that will probably cut at least once. A sword used to be one of the most valuable things a family could own. Now I want a sword, lol. Before 1940, most people really had to struggle to find enough food. Nothing fancy, just flour, lard, salt, coffee, sugar, or taro and fish and coconuts, depending on where you live. Between 1950 and 1970 in the US, People had plenty of food, but it wasn't as delicious as it is now. Someone who didn't pay much attention to diet and health would drift into being healthy weight. It took a real effort to eat enough to get fat. So, effortless obesity. That's a great way to look at it. Fat kings or princes, the amount of food they'd have to eat, the pure cost. That shit wasn't for the poor. Now? Fat poor people everywhere. Body fat. Indoor plumbing and hot water. To add to this, refrigeration and ice, for people in warmer climates. Spices. Seriously. They used to do massive trade routes between Britain and India to trade precious gems and metals for spices. Pineapples. In Victorian England, even the relatively well-to-do couldn't afford them, and you could rent a pineapple to put on display for a fancy dinner. Ever notice how many pineapples are in Victorian wallpaper and other designs? Whoa. I visited a Victorian castle-type place in Germany. Can't remember the name right now, but there were pineapples in so many of the portraits on the walls. I think the wallpaper had pineapples in a room or two. Never thought to ask why that was. Books. They had to be hand-copied prior to the invention of the printing press. Jewish holy texts still need to be handwritten on animal parchment. As a result, a Torah, first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, costs $60,000 new. In the gardens of the Sai there is a large patch dedicated solely to the cultivation of a plant called lamb's ear. It grows large, very, very soft and fuzzy leaves that look and feel like a lamb's ear. It was grown to be used exclusively as toilet paper for the king. Anyone else trying to use it would be subject to, literally, medieval punishment. Today, anyone can afford soft, quilted toilet tissue, while then only the king could afford to wipe his ass with something soft. Even 200 years later, the vast majority had to choose between corn cobs and pages from the Sears catalog. Or just wash your ass. Pretty sure my dad spent $2,500 on a plasma back in the day. Now I can get a bigger and better looking TV for $300. $3,200 for a huge 50-inch in 2009. I'm going to go with something that hasn't been said yet, video games. In 1986 The Legend of Zelda sold for $50, which is $149 in today's money. I'm no fan of today's $70 games, but you've got to admit they are cheap compared to that. Granted, games can balloon fast with all of the microtransactions now, but in most games you can still have a lot of fun without purchasing those. And the Atari 2600 was $200 in 1977 or $1,019 today. The ironic thing is the games on that were so basic that most people wouldn't even pay 25 cents to play them now. I remember saving up my change and collecting bottle and can deposits to have enough money to buy an Atari cartridge. My brother and I bought way more than we probably should have. I remember buying Pac-Man for like $39 a day it released. It was a very sad attempt at bringing that game to the home user. Purple. The royal color. Cell phones. I remember a girl thinking I was rich BC. My father had a car phone in his Subaru.